Hi, movie reviews here. Today, I'm going to explain a crime and horror film called The Loved Ones. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. One day, Brent is driving home with his father, just having a good time with each other. But after Brent looks away from the road for a few seconds, he fails to see a bloody man appear on the road. To avoid hitting the guy, he immediately swerves into a tree, instantly killing his father. 6 months later, Brent has become a shell of his previous self, even turning to the escape of vices to cope with the traumatic experience. Furthermore, he gets drugs from his friend, Jamie, who also gives him rubber protection so Brent can do it safely with his girlfriend, Holly. Just then, Mia, Jamie's crush, walks by, so Jamie immediately runs up to Mia so he can ask her to the school dance. Meanwhile, Lola, a classmate, suddenly comes up to Brent to ask him to the dance. However, Brent is obviously going to the dance with Holly, so he turns her down. Afterward, Holly greets Brent with a surprise that she has passed her driving exam. So, the two start hooking up in the car. As Holly removes Brent's clothes, she notices cuts on Brent's torso from his self-harming tendencies. She even sees the razor necklace that he wears. Still, Holly doesn't comment on it and just continues hooking up with Brent. While doing it, they don't notice that Lola is watching them from the window. Later on, Brent tells Holly that Lola asked him to the dance. In his room, Brent's mother, Carla, is worried about him getting into vehicles, especially with inexperienced drivers. So, Brent lashes out, thinking that Carla is blaming him for his father's death. Because of this, Brent takes a walk with his dog to clear his mind. As a way to cope with his emotions, Brent starts climbing the side of a small cliff and dangles himself on edge. Yet, panicking when he almost slips. As he recuperates in peaceful silence, an unknown assailant comes up from behind to chloroform Brent. Meanwhile, Jamie picks Mia up from the dance, even going as far as getting her flowers. Despite accepting Jamie's invitation to the dance, Mia seems disinterested in everything. On the other hand, Carla goes to check on Brent on the cliffside, calling out to him because he'll be late for the school dance. When he's nowhere to be found, Carla goes home to see Holly by their doorstep, both looking for Brent. Repeatedly, the two try contacting Brent. However, their concern arises when Brent's dog comes home looking bloodied. Immediately, Carla calls Paul, Mia's police officer father, to report Brent as missing. At Lola's home, her father brings Brent's unconscious body. She obsessively doodles all over Brent's picture in her room and pastes it in her scrapbook. All, until her father gives her a dress, presumably for the school dance. She even starts dressing up in front of her father. However, Lola seems to be planning a party of her own with Brent and her family. Fear immediately bubbles from Brent's gut as he wakes up tied to a chair in Lola's home, seeing Lola, her father, and a lobotomized woman they call Bright Eyes. Right away, he starts struggling, but to no avail. Then, Lola removes Brent's ability to speak by injecting bleach into his voice box. After that, they start taking pictures with him like they're at their own dance. At the actual school dance, Jamie is having a hard time getting Mia inside the school hall because she prefers indulging in substances inside Jamie's car. Meanwhile, at Lola's own party, she starts berating Bright Eyes and forces her to eat. Then, she tries to do the same thing to Brent and feeds him some chicken. However, he doesn't concede to her wicked games. Because of this, Lola's father stands up and threatens him with a hammer. So, Lola manages to make Brent lap her finger. As Brent pretends to need the bathroom to try and escape, Lola doesn't set him free. Instead, she takes a drinking glass and helps out Brent with his situation by trying to make him pee on the glass. Because of this, Lola catches up on Brent's lie. So, they threaten to nail his crotch on the chair if he doesn't pee on the glass. Afterward, Brent kicks Lola away from him and manages to force himself out of his binds. Almost free from his captors, Brent hops out of the house as Lola's father chases him. When he gets chased by his captor's car, Brent climbs up a tree to avoid getting hit. So, Lola and her father starts throwing stones at him until he falls off. Right away, they tie him back to the chair. But this time, they take extra measures to ensure he doesn't escape by nailing his foot on the floor using knives. Meanwhile, Paul investigates Brent's disappearance and finds his music player on the cliff. On the other hand, Holly hasn't left Carla's side to comfort her. Suddenly, they get a visit from Paul, showing them Brent's belongings. As the night progresses, the party goes on in Lola's household. This time, she starts showing Brent some pictures of her past victims, ever since she was young. Then, she shows him a picture of Timmy, Mia's brother, who happens to be the mysterious man that Brent almost ran over. Afterward, Lola draws on Brent's body by carving a heart and her initials on his chest using a fork. While Brent is all bloodied with his fresh wounds, they take the enjoyment out of torturing him. All by throwing salt on his wounds. But of course, due to Brent's damaged voice box, he can't even let out a proper scream. Meanwhile, Holly goes to Brent's room and finds a sweet love letter Brent wrote for her. On the other hand, Jamie finally gets Mia to join him inside the school dance, even though she's already high. Back at Lola's house, Lola's father crowns her as the night's queen of the dance, alongside Brent as her king. She blows out a party whistle in joy, then forces Brent to do the same despite not having the strength. At the school, Jamie simply enjoys a sweet slow dance with Mia, but she has other plans. While in front of other students and in the middle of the dance floor, Mia starts groping Jamie. Due to that, a chaperone makes them leave to do their business elsewhere. Meanwhile, Lola forces Brent to dance with her. Although they make him stand up, his feet are still stuck to the ground with knives. So, it brings Brent intense pain as Lola sways him from side to side. Just then, Lola confesses that Brent isn't his prince, simply another frog. So, Lola asks her father to dance with her. While his captors are busy with each other, Brent takes the opportunity to drag his razor necklace out of his pocket and onto his seat. As if things couldn't get worse, Lola starts admitting that she thinks her father is his true prince. Then, she starts leaning in to kiss him. However, they stop in their tracks when they notice Brent fall back on his seat. Because it's already so late in the night, Holly gets escorted home by Paul, still lamenting her boyfriend's disappearance. However, on Brent's side, he starts to uncover more of Lola's twisted ways. This time, he sees Lola and her father open a hidden trapdoor to their basement. As they do, he starts hearing horrific wails coming from Lola's previous victims. All with the same sound of shrieks coming from damaged voice boxes as Lola commands them to sing for their supper, which is just the raw skunk. Meanwhile, after getting banished from the party, Jamie and Mia start hooking up in his car. However, the chaperone comes back to tell them off, reminding them that they're still on school property, and should leave. On the other hand, Lola continues her tradition and plans to lobotomize Brent. Although this is normally her father's job, she plans to do it this time. But because she's inexperienced, it takes her a few tries to drill through Brent's skull. Unknown to the two captors, Brent tries hard to razor his way out of his confines. Right after the drilling, Lola's father hands her the boiling water to melt his brain, aiming to add him to her personal collection of mindless victims in the basement. However, Lola keeps messing up and even ends up spilling the hot water into her father's arms. Finally realizing that she can't successfully do it, Lola asks her father to widen the hole in his forehead. He concedes to Lola's request and drills a wider hole into Brent's skull. Just then, Brent has finally freed himself and manages to slash Lola's father with his razor. While they try to recuperate from the shock, Brent uses the drill to remove his remaining confines. Then, he pulls out the knives on his feet. While Lola is in shock, Brent repeatedly stabs Lola's father until she jumps on Brent's back to stop him. Despite his critical condition, Brent manages to overpower Lola and get her off him. Then, he immediately pushes Lola's father down into the basement. Immediately, Lola's mindless captors feast upon her father's body. All have turned into savages due to the years of being held captive and treated like trash. Due to the gruesome sight, Brent freezes in place as he witnesses the cannibalism. So, Lola is able to catch Brent off guard and push him down the basement too. As she's fueled with anger because of her father's death, Lola throws anything she could get her hands on at Brent before closing the trapdoor on him. Left alone in the dark with cannibalistic savages, Brent fights them off with a hammer, one of the things Lola threw down earlier. Meanwhile, Jamie takes Mia home after their own date night. Back in the basement, Brent has killed all of the captors and tries to find a way to get back up to the house. Meanwhile, with her party now in shambles, Lola goes to Bright Eye's room to smother her with a pillow, and kills her, who turns out to be her own mother. On the other hand, Holly remembers Brent's words before they parted for the last time, realizing that Lola invited Brent to the dance. Hence, she immediately calls Paul to report her realization. Right away, Paul drives straight to Lola's home and sees the bloody massacre inside the home, so he breaks in. While Paul looks around the kitchen, Brent continuously throws things to notify Paul of his location, especially because he can't use his voice. Just as Paul opens the trapdoor, Brent tries to warn him of an oncoming Lola, but it's already too late. In a flash, Lola has struck Paul's head with a butcher's knife, making his body fall to the basement. Out of anger, Brent takes Paul's gun and starts shooting aimlessly at Lola, who simply just moves away from the trapdoor. After extinguishing his bullets, Lola picks up Brent's razor blade and threatens to kill Carla, the same way Brent killed her father. Meanwhile, Holly still can't get a wink of sleep, deathly worried about Brent, especially without an update from Paul. So, she goes to start finding him herself. While driving in the streets, Lola moves away from the road to ambush her. Then, she throws the scrapbook in Holly's car to make her stop. Just as Lola opens the passenger door, Holly notices Brent's razor necklace on Lola. After staring at each other for a few moments, Lola tries to stab Holly, but she manages to defend herself from Lola and exit the car. Still, Lola is adamant about killing her, so Holly kicks Lola to fend her off. Meanwhile, Brent successfully gets himself out of the basement by using the corpses to climb up to the house. Without a moment's hesitation, Brent uses Paul's police car to drive away, avoiding Holly, who is running away from Lola on the road. However, Brent unknowingly runs over Lola. Right away, Holly gets into the police car, filled with relief, horror, and surprise at seeing Brent in his current state. They immediately welcome each other in one safe embrace before looking back at Lola on the road, still relentless with her attempt to kill the two. Hence, Brent just starts backing up, killing Lola before she can do any more harm. Then, Brent drives back, finally,